Once upon a time, College of the Atlantic student Virginia Brooks, while taking a tutorial with Karen Waldron on the writings of William Faulkner, and while completing an independent study on Southern literature, was amazed to discover, for the first time, which was quite humorous to some of her Mainer friends, that the Cajuns of Louisiana and the Acadians of Maine and Canada are directly related historically, familially, culturally, and narratively. They share a story. I love reading. While learning about and discussing an array of seemingly disparate subjects at COA, marine biology, chaos theory, art history, population dynamics, poetry, and much more, I have constantly participated in the unifying act of reading, of placing myself and these subjects into a unifying narrative. For my senior project, I desired to continue reading, to continue my quest for narrative, by asking the question, is it possible to read culture as we do literary texts by actively engaging with a culture's history, folktales, cuisine, tourist attractions, guidebooks, public monuments, and countless other concepts and entities we define as fundamental to its identity? And, if so, through our construction of this resulting cultural narrative, do we, as readers, become writers? For example, this comic I drew for a presentation I recently gave to my French class in Vichy, France, portrays some aspects of Acadian and Cajun culture and history, a unique cultural narrative which is part fact and part fabrication, a story. This is a rendering which is factually true and yet mediated by my own experience and drawing ability, and language ability. At this point, I had only learned 2 French tenses. I believe reading can be seen as fundamentally human ecological. Reading is not simply a passive act, but one which requires construction and mediation. The resulting malleability of narrative often makes it incredibly difficult to differentiate between fact and fiction, as I describe in this passage from my final project. As with folklore and mythology, a defining quality of any narrative is its manifestation as a mediated organization of details. Therefore, all organizations of information which are as seemingly disparate as historic texts, children's fairy tales, or statues erected in the imagined likeness of historical or fictional characters represent specific renditions of stories. And by objecting a text to a particular type of reading, we construct an imaginary universe. How we view and read a narrative has a direct impact on the narrative and our experience reading it, meaning the elements of cultural narrative, often understood as either fictional or factual, are not opposing or mutually exclusive, but amalgamations of one another. In the steps of William Wadsworth Longfellow's fictional Acadian heroine Evangeline, I embarked on a physical quest to answer my questions. Traveling from the realms of Wikipedia, Thorndike Library, and the Acadian National Park Archives, to the St. John River Valley in northern Maine, and then to Louisiana, then a quick jaunt in Quebec, Canada, and finally a longer stay in France, I concentrated my efforts on reading and illuminating the cultural narrative, the story of the Acadians and the Cajuns. My resulting paper is the outcome of exploring numerous libraries and databases, road trips, plane trips, and train trips, listening to music, taking French classes, attending Francophone conventions, festivals, and reunions, staring for a long time at countless statues and plaques, collecting pamphlets, staying in hostels, some amateur photography, countless conversations with wonderful, fascinating people, and walking, miles and miles of walking. I am by no means an ethnographer, and I do not feign to make any conclusions about the Acadian and Cajun cultures. I, however, chose to partake in an active reading of their stories, to follow where their narrative led me, and become completely immersed in it. Like any other reading, it is unique, mediated by my own personal interpretations. My conclusions about cultural narrative are not simply that we can read the stories of a culture, person, or a place, in many ways if we take the time to look, but that what and how we decide to read is also an act of authoring, best done with attention and care. As I continue my own life story next year, completing an internship at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, I intend to read and experience the innumerable narratives I encounter and create with mindfulness, awareness, imagination, and enthusiasm as a human ecologist. Thank you.
did a lot of travel. How helpful was COA in facilitating those movements?
The question was, how helpful was COA in facilitating my travels? And COA helped to fund a lot of those travels, so yes, it was very, very helpful. The program that I went on to France was part of a course that Karen Waldron and Gray Cox co-taught. It was a literature and philosophy course. And the Presidential Scholarship helped fund my trip to Louisiana. Also, Meg Scheid, who is an alum of COA, works for the St. Croix Historic Site, and she helped me quite a bit as well with finding contacts.